It's Talk Funny, a podcast by Mark Bailey and other comics from all over. We ended up in Japan because we wanted to see what too many convenience stores looks like. The Talk Funny podcast from NagoyaRadio.com and Nagoya Comedy. Here's Mark Bailey.
Welcome back to Talk Funny. I'm Mark Bailey. We're here with Steve Howard.
Hello.
Steve, I think you sometimes talk about your son on stage and comedy, and I don't know if you've been at the show where I talked about my wife. There was one of those.
Yeah, maybe. I might remember something about that, yeah.
It's only 80% of them. But that's why my wife will never be in the audience, because she'll say, I don't do that. Yeah, you do that. You do that. But yeah, so are there perils to talking about your family? Like, pretty careful on the podcast.
Yeah.
I don't give the names of my kids generally,
right.
And I try not to actually say names of people that we're talking about.
Yeah.
But what are the perils of talking about family members on stage?
Well, like in my case, of course, I write and practice all of my material at home, and I try to do it as much as possible when there's nobody there. But my wife's TOEIC score is like 960. And she's an English teacher,
wow.
So, I mean, completely fluent. So there's really no way for me to hide it, you know. If she happens to walk in and I'm telling a bit about her or my son, she's immediately going to know what I'm talking about. So all the practice that I do before our shows has to be done whenever they're out of the house, because otherwise she'll know what I'm doing, which she definitely probably would not want me to do on stage.
So that explains your lack of practice. No, I'm kidding. Yeah. But I mean, you can do it when you're out, right?
Yeah.
People think you're crazy, but I do that.
Yeah.
I go to an empty classroom and I tape it and I write cues on the board, and then I gradually erase the cues and I just memorize it. But for us, as we've said many times, memorizing a 10-minute bit that you're going to discard for the next month and doing this every month really takes a toll on your memory. So you have to, get some actual techniques to work on with that. Has she ever heard you making fun of her or something?
Well, there's been a couple of times when she's asked me, well, what were your jokes and stuff, and I told her a couple of them, and she did not think it was funny. And then the other side is like, her parents live about 5 minutes away from us, so I'm over there quite a bit, and they all know that I do comedy, but they think Japanese comedy. Oh, he's doing slapstick and stuff, and so they're always asking me questions. Well, what do you do? But it's kind of like, well, none of them really speak fluent English, and I don't think they would really get Western comedy. So I try to explain the joke to them and just get blank stares. Like, why is that funny? You didn't dress up as a schoolgirl and hit somebody over the head with a shoe. Why is that funny?
I don't think I have you mixed up with someone. I think one of the first bits I ever heard you do was actually not on the stage. We were just at one of the comedy shows. You have a bit about World War II and your father-in-law or something?
Yeah. Well, that's a true story.
Did they ever hear that? Did they ever?
No, they never heard me perform it, but that's a true story about me and my father.
What was the punchline? Is something about...
Well, the punchline was, if it's all about effort, then why did Japan lose the war? Was the that was the actual conversation. But that was when I was asking for my wife's hand in marriage, actually. Fun night.
Well, and so it didn't go well because you got it.
No.
Yeah. So, can you remember the example what your wife wasn't pleased with? One of the premises?
Well, I think like one of the recent ones was it was actually making a joke about my son, and it's a total joke, but it was I said something like, "Oh, and I'm a little worried because I think he might have a touch of ADHD." The big clue to me was I noticed that his teacher had him hooked up to an IV of Ritalin in his class, and she really didn't like that one at all. But I mean, it's a complete joke. I'm just.
I had an instance where. You may have been in the audience. It's Koala Cafe, rest in peace. One of the many places we've buried venues. And I did a bunch of stuff. I think I did jokes like, what's the difference between onions and my wife, and I'm going to cry when I cut up the onions, and suicide's a big problem, but the bigger problem is how do I talk my wife into doing that? And it was all about, I told my wife I can't, I have a permanent visa and I have a graduate degree, but I can't be what I want to be. She said, well, you have the fluency degree even in Japanese level 1. You could be anything you want to be. And I said, not with you. And she said, well, what do you want to be? And I said, a widower, And so that's my whole set, the whole thing. And afterwards, this plainclothes policewoman comes up and talks to me. I don't know, she's a policeman at first, and she said, you should really talk to someone if those are issues that you think about a lot, and the things you said are really dangerous. You really, you can't do what you've said you want to do, that. And I said, you're at a comedy show, right? And she said, she gave me her card, and she said, you can call me anytime, and I specialize in this. And I looked at it, and it was Aichi Police Division of Domestic Violence. And I said, my name is Miles Carver, so if you have any questions, I live in Ibino. Sorry, Miles, former comic of ours. And we'll be talking about performing under the influence on another show. One of the other things I wanted to mention on this, we talked before about pet peeves with Steve. Here's another one about subways. Have you had this where you're walking, everyone's walking quickly at the subway station, and you're on the right side, you're headed straight. There's a guy on the left side headed straight opposite you, going the other way, and coming at you quickly. He sees you, so he heads for the wall in front of you into your path.
Right.
If this was a speedway, there'd be an accident.
Yeah.
They inevitably, it's like a cue on a video game or something.
Yeah.
All right, cue disaster. And they dive into the wall. I never understood why they're doing that.
Yeah.
And I always say, if you just went straight, we'd both be fine. Now you slowed me down. We don't have to negotiate. You're going straight. I'm going straight. Right. We're not near each other. It's going to be fine. We don't need an interaction. We don't need to negotiate. What I've derived from that is I think actually the kamikaze pilots, I think they were trying to avoid the ships. They just suck at it. Head for the wall. Have you had that experience? And what do you do when it happens?
I had a joke that was, in such a small country like Japan, why is it that there's so many people here that seem to have the spatial awareness of roadkill?
Exactly. I have another one, Hello Patreon. I think actually during the Hiroshima bombing, I think everyone was trying to avoid the bomb, but because they are used to walking in Japanese stations, they stood right under it. They immediately, I think if you can measure that, I think they hit dead center because they never go where they're supposed to go. You can predict anything about a Japanese person, their favorite food, their favorite TV show, everything except where they're going to walk at a subway station. That's that's just another pet peeve.
Yeah, and most of the subway stations, by the way, have arrows telling you where you're supposed to walk.
They can read all kanji except for arrows.
Right.
I do. I'm constantly pointing out. They're always on the opposite side.
Yeah.
And I'm constantly pointing out, yajirushi desu kido. And I'm like, oh, yeah, you didn't see that. Just like you don't see the non-smoking signs. Can you not read signs? You can only read kanji? I'm actually surprised that kanji is not Japanese because it is so inefficient and so illogical. I think probably they did come up with it, then the Chinese stole it because they steal everything. And then the Japanese said, kanji really kind of sucks. We really don't want to own up to it. We did borrow it from the Chinese.
Well, I've noticed one thing, like when I'm in the train station, the subway stations, I'll be looking at the sign with the stations, and most of the time they'll have it written in English, and then the kanji. And a lot of times I can find it a lot faster because I can read the English. The station I'm looking for starts with SU. I can be, it takes me less time to find it in English than it takes Japanese people a lot of times trying to find the kanji.
For example, this one I use, a lot of subway stations have ue, the kanji for ue, in them. That can be pronounced ue, it can be pronounced jo, it can be pronounced kami, it can be pronounced noru, noboru. I think there's 13, 14 pronunciations for that, and they're used in all subway stations. So if the first one, you don't know if you're listening for a jo or a ue or a kami. I have a joke, I haven't done it in a long time, but one of my jokes was, subway, it's hard to hear even the announcements. I mean, first of all, you're in another language, and then you're trying to hear the announcements, and it's kind of a guy doing this. So, I got used to learning those station names. Not Kami Maezu, but... And so I would say, so where do you get off? Do you get off at... or do you get off at... why are you doing that with your mouth? Well, because that's the way I learned it, And I was surprised to find that they actually enunciate what normal people actually enunciate it. But the subways only hire people with speech impediments, apparently. It's not the microphone.
It's like they only hire the Bob Dylans of Japan, or the Neil Youngs of Japan to be train conductors. I
mean, it's 2019. I think sound technology has evolved from the potato. They're still talking into a potato. You could... microphones, I think they make them in a place called Hamamatsu by a company called Yamaha. You might have heard of it. All right, I had a couple of other things. We'll probably have to postpone that until next show. This has been Mark Bailey, Steve Howard on Talk Funny.